For 4 years, Station 7 had remained dark above a snow-covered New Hampshire valley. Then, in the middle of a winter storm, 3 careful knocks sounded at Silas Mercer's door. Outside stood Bishop, an injured German shepherd carrying a brass key from Silas's past. The loyal K9 had crossed the mountain because 7 missing people were running out of time. To reach them, Silas would have to reopen the station and face the grief he had locked away with it. But the hardest choice would be deciding whether to preserve his wife's final creation or use it to save lives. Tell us where you're watching from or share your thoughts after the story. And please like and subscribe to help SEAL K9 Heroes reach 1,000 subscribers. Chapter 1. Station 7 wakes again. Snow had been falling over Cedar Hollow since late afternoon, but after dark it changed character. What had begun as a soft winter veil became a steady white current pouring through the White Mountains. It covered fences, erased tire tracks, and rounded the roofs of the old maple farms until the valley looked untouched by human hands. The church steeple in town remained visible for a while, black against the moonlit sky, before the storm swallowed that too. High on the northern slope stood Station 7. The structure had once been a weather observation post, built from granite, cedar, and the stubborn belief that people could measure a mountain if they placed enough instruments on it. A narrow signal tower rose above the roof. Its warning light had been dark for 4 winters. Silas Mercer lived beneath it alone. At 43, Silas still carried the height and disciplined strength of his military years. He stood nearly 6'3", broad through the shoulders and lean through the waist, with the balanced posture of a man trained to move over uncertain ground. His ash-brown hair was clipped short at the sides, silver beginning to gather at both temples. He kept his face clean-shaven, leaving nothing to soften the high cheekbones, strong chin, or the small break through his left eyebrow. His green-gray eyes had once made people believe he was calmer than he felt. Now there was rarely anyone close enough to make that mistake. Silas sat at the workbench beside the kitchen, repairing the voltage regulator from a neighbor's generator. He wore an olive combat shirt with woodland camouflage sleeves and dark bands around the upper arms, brown field trousers, and boots that had dried unevenly near the stove. A black-faced field watch rested on his right wrist. It had belonged to Elise. The watch still ran 3 seconds slow. Silas knew how to correct it. He never did. He turned a small brass contact beneath the work lamp and listened to the wind press against the northern wall. Working with machines required a kind of attention that did not ask anything personal from him. A damaged regulator did not offer condolences. A broken relay never suggested that 4 years was long enough to begin attending church suppers again. Machines simply told the truth, in resistance, heat, and sound. Silas understood them. People were harder. Before leaving the Navy, he had served as a tactical communications specialist with the SEAL teams. His work had not been the kind that appeared in newspaper photographs. He had built secure links under bad conditions, repaired antennas in places where every minute mattered, and learned to separate useful voices from noise. Afterward, he and Elise returned to New Hampshire and built the Winter Lantern Network across Cedar Hollow. Elise had been an emergency systems engineer with restless hands and an intolerance for bad planning. She believed no mountain town should depend entirely on cell towers, software updates, or a single electrical grid. Together, they had connected 7 relay stations through battery-powered radios, directional lamps, buried wire, and old service routes known mostly to retired workers. Station 7 had been the heart of it. The basement below Silas still contained its master console. The steel door had remained locked since the spring after Elise died. She had been driving toward Station 2 during an early season freeze when her vehicle left the road. Silas had been asleep after nearly 2 days without rest. His phone had been on silent. Her final call remained unanswered. He had replayed that fact so often, it no longer felt like a memory. It felt like a verdict. After the funeral, Silas withdrew Station 7 from the network and submitted a technical report recommending that the county retire the aging system. He cited corroded connections, limited funding, and the superiority of the new digital emergency grid. Every word in the report had been technically defensible. None of it had been the full truth. The county approved the shutdown. New towers went up. The amber lamps stopped appearing in the winter woods. Silas stopped answering invitations. He still repaired equipment for people in town, but customers left machines in the shed beside the lower road and found them fixed a day or two later. Payment went into a metal box. Conversation was unnecessary. The station that had once carried voices across the valley became a home arranged around silence. There were still 2 chairs at the kitchen table. Silas had never removed the second. He set the regulator contact into place and reached for a screwdriver. 3 soft taps touched the front door. His hand stopped. The sound was too measured for falling ice, too low for the loose shutter near the pantry window. Silas waited. The stove clicked as the iron contracted. Wind moved under the eaves with a thin, searching whistle. Nothing followed. He looked back at the regulator. Tap, tap, tap. The second set was weaker. Silas rose without hurry, although something inside him had already become alert. He crossed the room, taking the flashlight from the hook beside the entryway. His gaze passed over the old field radio on the shelf and the brass key hanging from a leather loop near the hall. The key opened the basement. He had not touched it in months. A faint scrape moved across the porch boards. Silas unlocked the door. Wind pushed it inward. Snow spilled across the threshold and curled around his boots. Beyond the porch, the world had disappeared into a shifting white wall. His flashlight found the railing, the buried steps, and then a dark shape lying beside the door. The German shepherd lifted his head. He was large, long-legged, and built for endurance rather than bulk. Snow crusted the black saddle of his coat, while the fur beneath his neck and along his legs showed a deep honey gold. A narrow golden line divided the dark fur on his forehead and ran toward the bridge of his nose. His right ear stood straight. The tip of the left bent outward from an old healed tear. The dog wore a brick-red rescue harness with black webbing and silver reflective strips. One front paw was lifted. The shoulder above it trembled each time he tried to shift his weight. A stitched patch on the harness read, "Bishop." Beneath it was the emblem of New Hampshire Mountain Search and Rescue. Silas lowered into a crouch, keeping his movements slow. "Easy." Bishop did not shrink away. His amber eyes remained steady on Silas, alert despite the exhaustion weighing down his body. Silas extended the back of one hand. The dog leaned forward enough to take in his scent, then looked past him through the open doorway. His gaze moved through the room, the stove, the hall, the windows, the second exit beside the workshop. He was assessing the space. Silas recognized the habit. "You're still on duty," he said. Bishop tried to stand. His good foreleg straightened, but the injured shoulder failed to support him. Silas caught the handle of the harness before the dog slipped against the porch. Bishop went rigid. Silas held still. After a moment, the tension beneath the harness eased. Close up, Silas could see the damage more clearly. Ice had packed between the toes of the lifted paw. One pad was torn, not badly enough to threaten the limb, but enough to make every step painful. The shoulder looked bruised beneath the thick fur. The dog's breathing was controlled but faster than it should have been. "You came a long way," Silas murmured. Bishop looked toward the darkness behind him. Silas followed his gaze. Any tracks the dog had left were already gone. He stepped backward into the station. "Come inside." Bishop remained on the porch. Schlaug made the standard hand signal for shelter. The dog watched him, but did not move. For a moment, irritation rose in Silas. Not at Bishop, but at the strange sense that he was being tested by an animal barely able to stand. Then his flashlight passed over the weathered wooden plaque beside the door. Most of the painted letters had faded, but the original wording remained visible. Emergency Relay Station 7. Silas remembered 2 winter exercises held years earlier, before the county replaced the old network. Search teams had been trained to use the relay stations as emergency shelters. Their dogs had learned the locations by scent, repetition, and command. A phrase surfaced from memory. Silas had spoken it hundreds of times, not once since Elise died. "Station safe," he said. His voice sounded unfamiliar inside the storm. "Relay secure." Bishop stepped across the threshold. The response was immediate and precise. Silas closed the door slowly. He had seen Bishop before, not recently, and not well enough to remember his name. But the bent ear and golden line between the eyes belonged to a younger dog who had crossed Station 7's training yard beside a dark-haired handler during 2 county exercises. Bishop had not found a random cabin. He had found a designated safe point. Silas spread an old wool blanket near the stove. Bishop circled once before lowering himself, arranging his body so he could see both the front door and the window above the sink. Even injured, he chose a position from which he could watch the room. Silas brought warm water, clean towels, and the medical kit from the kitchen cabinet. He softened the ice around Bishop's paw a little at a time. The dog never pulled away, though his jaw tightened when Silas cleaned the damaged pad. The shoulder did not appear unstable. Bruised, perhaps from a fall or collision beneath the snow, Silas wrapped the paw and offered water. Bishop looked at the bowl. Then he looked north. The window held only blowing snow, but his ears angled toward something beyond it. "You need to drink." Bishop did not move. Silas slid the bowl closer. The dog's nose lowered briefly, yet he still refused. Silas understood discipline in ways he wished he did not. The dog had not decided the assignment was finished. He was waiting for permission. "Drink." Bishop drank, not desperately, carefully, in controlled mouthfuls, stopping twice to listen to the storm. Silas placed a small portion of warmed food beside him. Bishop ignored it. Instead, he pushed himself upright and limped toward the door. "No." Bishop stopped. The dog raised his wrapped paw and touched the floorboards. Once. Twice. 3 times. The same rhythm that had sounded against the door. Silas stared at him. A trained alert. Not a request to be let outside. A signal directed at the person inside. Bishop turned his head toward the left side of his harness. Only then did Silas notice the waterproof compartment hidden beneath a fold of red fabric. The zipper had frozen shut. He warmed it between his palms until the teeth loosened. Inside was a narrow strip of coated cloth. When Silas unfolded it, an old map opened across the table. 7 amber circles formed a route through Cedar Hollow, linked by service roads, abandoned telephone corridors, and forest paths. Station 7 sat at the northern edge. Beside several relay points were handwritten maintenance dates. The most recent was from the current month. Silas checked again. The network had been officially inactive for 4 years. Someone had continued maintaining it. Beneath the map lay a laminated command card. Relay 7, find help. At the bottom of the compartment rested a brass key. Silas knew what it was before lifting it. A small amber lantern had been engraved into the circular head. Along the shaft were the words, Winter Lantern, Station 7. He turned it over. 3 initials had been scratched into the back by hand. EM. The cuts were imperfect. The middle bar of the E extended slightly farther than the others. Elise marked her tools that way because she claimed equipment wandered whenever engineers became polite about ownership. Silas pressed his thumb against the letters. For 4 years, he had preserved her workshop exactly as she left it. Pens remained inside a chipped ceramic cup. Wire spools sat in labeled bins. A gray sweater still hung from the back of her chair. He had believed keeping those things unchanged was a form of devotion. But this key had not remained still. It had passed through other hands. It had crossed the mountain inside a rescue dog's harness and returned on the worst night of winter. Bishop left the food untouched and looked at Silas. No whining, no restless circling, only expectation. Silas moved to the window. Through a brief break in the snow, he saw the lower valley. A handful of lights remained visible near Cedar Hollow, blurred by distance. Then the storm closed over them. Bishop limped to his side and stood facing north. Silas rested a hand lightly on the rescue harness. The dog leaned into the contact for 1 second. Not enough to seek comfort, only enough to acknowledge that Silas was there. Then Bishop shifted his weight toward the door again. "Stay," Silas said. Bishop obeyed. The immediate trust in that obedience unsettled Silas more than resistance would have. The dog had accepted him as part of the assignment. Silas looked down at the key, then toward the dark hallway leading to the basement stairs. Station 7 had not transmitted in 4 years. The master console might no longer function. The old batteries could be ruined. The other stations were supposed to have been dismantled or abandoned. None of those facts changed what had arrived at his door. A wounded search dog had crossed the mountain carrying a command connected to Elise's network. Bishop had not come to ask Silas for shelter. Shelter had only kept him alive long enough to deliver the message. He had come because somewhere beyond the storm, someone still believed Station 7 would answer. And for the first time since Elise's final call, Silas understood that silence was no longer the same thing as being left alone. Sometimes silence meant another voice had not yet found a way through. Bishop touched the floor once more. Silas closed his fingers around the brass key. The dog had completed his part of the command. Now the mountain was waiting for Silas to complete his. Chapter 2. The Missing on North Pass. Silas set Elise's brass key on the kitchen table and reached for the telephone. The decision irritated him. Calling someone meant explaining. Explaining meant allowing another person into the room, into the problem, perhaps even into the parts of his life he had arranged so carefully around absence. Bishop made the choice easier by trying to stand. The German shepherd pushed himself off the blanket, favored his wrapped front paw, and nearly lost his balance when the bruised shoulder took his weight. Silas caught the handle of the rescue harness before the dog reached the door. No. Bishop looked up at him without embarrassment. The dog's body had reached its limit. His sense of duty had not. Silas guided him back toward the stove, then dialed the number of the only person in Cedar Hollow likely to answer a veterinary call near midnight. "Doctor, Lenora Pike picked up after 4 rings. Tell me you haven't taken apart another generator without labeling the wires." "It's not a generator." That answer has never improved my evening. "I have an injured search dog." The humor vanished from her voice. "What injuries?" Silas described the damaged paw, shoulder swelling, cold exposure, and exhaustion. Lenora interrupted twice to clarify Bishop's breathing and ability to bear weight. "Keep him warm, not hot," she said. "No human medication, small amounts of water. I'm coming up. The road is getting worse. I own tire chains, Silas." "I know. And yet you still felt obligated to explain winter to me." The call ended. Silas stood with the receiver in his hand for a moment longer than necessary. Lenora had been Elise's closest friend long before Silas returned to New Hampshire. She had attended their wedding in muddy boots after helping deliver a calf during an October rainstorm. After Elise's death, Lenora had continued visiting Station 7 with groceries, repair requests, and increasingly transparent excuses. Silas had eventually made himself difficult enough to discourage her, apparently not permanently. While he waited, he removed Bishop's wet harness and checked the identification patch more closely. The brick-red fabric was professional rescue equipment rather than military gear, fitted with reflective strips, lifting handles, and sealed compartments. Bishop watched every movement. When Silas placed the brass key beside the harness, the dog reached forward and rested his wrapped paw over it. Then he turned his head north. Silas studied him. "You know what that opens?" Bishop's ears shifted. It was not an answer, but it felt uncomfortably close to one. Headlights appeared below the station 25 minutes later, sliding between the snow-heavy spruce trees. An old dark green pickup climbed the final slope with chains gripping the road in a steady metallic rhythm. Lenora entered carrying a leather medical bag and a folded thermal blanket under one arm. At 56, she possessed the practical strength of someone who had spent decades lifting animals that did not understand why help sometimes hurt. Her auburn bob had gone heavily silver around the temples, and melting snow darkened the shoulders of her forest green waxed coat. Beneath it, she wore gray-blue scrubs and a thick teal cardigan. A small maple leaf clip held her hair away from a broad, freckled face. She took one look at Silas. "You look worse than the dog." "Good to see you too." "Move." Lenora crossed the room and lowered herself several feet from Bishop rather than approaching directly. She placed the medical bag on the floor, removed her glasses, and waited. Bishop lifted his head. His amber eyes moved from her hands to her face, then back to Silas. "He's checking whether you invited me," Lenora said. "I called you." "That is not the same as inviting anyone." Bishop allowed her closer after smelling the back of her hand. Lenora examined him slowly, beginning with his gums and breathing before moving to the injured paw and shoulder. She spoke in a low, conversational tone throughout, not because Bishop understood every word, but because rhythm mattered to frightened or exhausted animals. The paw pad had a clean but painful tear. The shoulder was badly bruised, likely from a collision with a fallen branch or hidden rock beneath the snow. There was no sign of a fracture. "He's mildly dehydrated," Lenora said. "Exhausted, but his temperature is improving." "Can he travel?" "Not the way he came here." Bishop's head rose at the word. Lenora gave him a level look. "You are not part of this discussion." The dog continued watching her. "He can walk short, controlled distances if there's a genuine need," she continued. "Anything longer requires transport. Sled, tracked vehicle, or a proper carry system." "He still thinks he's working." "He is working. That doesn't mean we let him destroy the part of himself that makes the work possible." The sentence was meant for Bishop. Silas knew better. Lenora rewrapped the injured paw and gave the dog measured fluids. Only then did she notice the map, command card, and brass key on the table. Her hands stopped. Elise's mark, she said. Silas nodded. Lenora picked up the coated map. Her eyes moved over the 7 amber stations and the handwritten dates beside them. This entry is from January. I can read. I'm confirming that you understand what you're reading. The network was retired. The county stopped paying for it. The equipment was supposed to be removed. Some of those stations sit on private property. Silas looked at her. You knew people were maintaining them? I knew June still used local radio during power failures. I knew Harlan refused to throw away any machine built before he turned 60. I did not know they had kept the entire route functional. Her answer sounded honest. That did not make Silas like it. For 4 years, he had believed the Winter Lantern network existed only in locked rooms, old diagrams, and the permanent ache associated with Elise's workbench. The recent markings on the map suggested that life had continued through the system after he abandoned it. Someone had replaced batteries. Someone had tested lamps. Someone had walked routes he had declared obsolete. Bishop pushed himself upright again. Lenora placed one hand against his chest, but the dog did not attempt to pass her. Instead, he took 2 careful steps toward the table and touched his nose to the brass key. Lenora watched him, then looked at Silas. He didn't find your house. Silas said nothing. He found Station 7. The distinction settled into the room. Silas had spent years treating the building as the farthest edge of his private life. Bishop had crossed the storm because, in the dog's training and memory, this place still belonged to everyone who needed shelter. The county emergency radio crackled from the shelf. A dispatcher requested any available tracked units for North Pass Road. Another voice reported that the digital repeater on Hartwell Ridge had stopped responding. Then Sheriff Wade Carver came over the channel. Station 7, this is Carver. Silas, answer if you're monitoring. Silas reached for the handset. I'm here. Wade's voice carried the restrained urgency of a man who understood that panic wasted time. At 51, he had served Cedar Hollow County long enough to know every road, family argument, and unreliable bridge in the valley. Silas pictured his weathered face bent over a map, close-cropped hair graying above the ears, reading glasses balanced lower than intended. We received word that Bishop may have reached your station. He did. Condition? Lenora leaned toward the radio. Stable, no fracture, paw injury, shoulder trauma, cold, and exhaustion. He should not be traveling except in short, controlled intervals. Relief moved through Wade's next breath. Understood. His handler is Audrey Keene. She and 6 members of the Cedar Hollow Winter Communications Group are missing. Bishop reacted before Silas did. At Audrey's name, the dog stood so quickly that his injured shoulder dipped. Lenora caught the harness and steadied him. Where was their last position? Silas asked. North Pass. We found their vehicle 40 minutes ago. Wade explained that the group had left Cedar Hollow that morning to inspect the old emergency stations before the winter festival. The forecast had called for light snow beginning after dark. A pressure system shifted unexpectedly, bringing heavy weather nearly 8 hours earlier than predicted. GPS led the first county team to the vehicle. It was empty. A large spruce blocked the road ahead. Wind-driven snow had piled around the rear of the vehicle and covered the exhaust outlet. The doors were unlocked, several emergency blankets were missing, and a note had been secured beneath the windshield wiper. Cabin air unsafe, Wade read. Moving to shelter. Silas looked at the map. They made the right call. We believe so. They tried clearing the exhaust, but snow kept sliding off the upper bank. One of them has a heart condition. Remaining in the vehicle with the engine running wasn't safe. Footprints? Search team followed them for 60 yards. The wind erased the rest. Helicopter? Grounded. Ice risk. Road access? 2 blocked routes. Public Works is clearing East Fork, but North Pass itself may take hours. The facts formed a problem with too many blank spaces. The county knew where the vehicle had stopped, but not where its occupants had gone. The missing group included people familiar with the mountain, which widened rather than narrowed the possibilities. Experienced people could identify more shelters, more service paths, and more reasons to alter course. Wade continued. The Hartwell Ridge Tower is down. We have personnel and equipment, but radio coverage above the east drainage is unreliable. Silas opened the fabric map fully. 7 marked stations crossed the valley, joined by old telephone corridors and maintenance paths excluded from modern navigation systems. The latest inspection marks were not random notes. They formed a partial chain through the region surrounding North Pass. Who exactly is missing? Lenora asked. Audrey plus 6 retired specialists. Emergency nurse, railroad dispatcher, telephone lineman, meteorological technician, rail maintenance supervisor, and 1 former radio operator. Not tourists. Not careless amateurs. The Winter Communications Group was built from people whose knowledge had outlived their official job titles. They would move toward a relay site, Silas said. Maybe, Wade replied. But the county maps no longer classify most of those buildings as emergency shelters. Their maps might. Bishop twisted toward his harness, nosing beneath one of the loosened straps. Something dark red had been trapped against the lining. Lenora worked it free. A woman's insulated glove. The reinforced palm was black, while the outer fabric matched the dark brick red accents on Bishop's equipment. A small white label inside carried the initials AK. Bishop took the glove carefully from Lenora. He limped across the room and placed it in front of Silas. Then he looked toward the door. Silas did not mistake the meaning for anything supernatural. The glove carried Audrey's scent. Bishop associated it with the person he had been trained to find, follow, and protect. But the simple act held more weight than a clue. The dog had brought back the only part of Audrey he could carry. Wade's voice came through the radio again. Mountain Rescue is establishing forward command at East Fork. Tessa Klein is headed to your station. Silas knew the name. Tessa commanded the county's Mountain Search and Rescue Unit and had a reputation for distrusting both reckless volunteers and dramatic experts. Why here? He asked. Because Bishop came there, and because you may have the only map showing where this group believed help still existed. I haven't agreed to participate. Lenora folded her arms. Wade did not answer immediately. No, he said at last. But Audrey apparently believed you would. The channel closed before Silas could respond. Bishop remained beside Audrey's glove, maintaining his attention on Silas. You cannot take him back into the storm on foot, Lenora said. I know. You said that before asking whether he could travel. He may be needed for scent identification. For a short interval, under supervision. He gets transported everywhere else. Silas met her gaze. Lenora's expression held no accusation, only a boundary. He is loyal, she said. That does not make him equipment. Silas looked down at Bishop. No, he said. It doesn't. The agreement changed something small between him and Lenora. Not forgiveness, not renewed friendship, but enough trust for the next decision. An engine approached outside, heavier than Lenora's pickup. A tracked county utility vehicle stopped beneath the porch light. Tessa Klein entered carrying a waterproof operations board and a white rescue helmet beneath one arm. She was 46, compactly built, with black hair cut short and silver beginning to show along one side. Her orange rescue shell was marked by gray reflective panels, and every buckle, strap, and piece of equipment sat exactly where it could be reached, without thought. Her dark eyes crossed the room once, taking in Bishop, Lenora's medical supplies, Audrey's glove, and the map. "You're Silas Mercer." "Silas is fine. I'm Tessa." She knelt near Bishop but waited until Lenora nodded before checking his identification patch. "What can he safely do?" "Brief scent work on stable ground," Lenora answered. "No sustained travel, no climbing, no repeated strain on the shoulder." Tessa wrote each restriction down. She then stood over the map. "This system was decommissioned." "Officially," Silas said. "Unofficial systems get people in trouble when no one knows who is responsible for them. They also work when official towers fail." Tessa looked at him. "I don't need a debate about old versus new. I need verified information." Her finger moved along the amber route. "If one active relay can narrow the search area, we use it. If the equipment is unreliable, we move on." She glanced toward the hallway. "Can Station 7 transmit?" Silas followed her gaze to the steel basement door. He could have explained the likely condition of the batteries, the possibility of damaged contacts, or the uncertainty that anyone remained on the network to answer. Those were valid concerns. They were also ways to postpone touching the key. Tessa did not demand an immediate promise. She simply set the waterproof operations board on the table beside Audrey's glove. "We have 7 missing adults, worsening weather, and an expanding search zone. You do not have to lead the rescue. You do not have to leave this building." She pointed toward the locked room. "But I need to know whether what is behind that door can help." Bishop lowered himself onto this blanket, finally giving in to exhaustion. Before resting his head, he stretched one paw until it touched the edge of the brass key. Silas picked it up. The key had returned to Station 7 because other people had kept Elise's network alive, because Audrey had trusted an old command, because a wounded dog had remembered the route when modern systems stopped giving answers. Silas walked down the hallway. Behind him, no one spoke. He inserted the brass key into the basement lock. The mechanism resisted after 4 winters of disuse. Silas adjusted the angle and pressed inward until the old pins shifted. The lock released with a deep click. He placed his hand on the steel handle. Then Silas opened the equipment room. 1. Tom tat noi dung bang tieng viet Silas goi bak si thu ilu jong Lenora pike gen tram sobei je kiem tra bishop. Lenora ksach nahan chu cho kong bi gai ksuong hung bi mat nuoch nhe. Ton thuong jem chan va bam vai. Bishop chi tso the tuk hien. Hung quang di chuyen angan va phai juok van chuyen trong fan lon han trin. Qua banjo va chiek kua mangdao kach kua Elise. Silas va Lenora han ra tuyen jen mua jong van juok mot sotin guyen vien am tam bao tri. Lenora chi ra rang bishop kong tim jen ha rieng kua Silas ma tim jen mot tram ku ho jan juoch huan luyen. Kan sat truong vad carver thong bao Audrey kine chung sao than vien hom lien lach mua jong jamat. Tichtren juong North Pass. Chietsk se chua ho juots tim tai trong kong. Sao ki ong sabituyet chekin. Kien hom buots fairoik se tim show tru. Trukthang kong the ho jong. Kach tuyen juong, bikaijo chan va thap. Lien lach ki thuat so jang matin hiu. King he ten Audrey. Bishop lay chiek gang kua kora koi dai jai va jat trukmat Silas. Tisa Klein, chi hoi joi tim kiem ku nan mien nui, gen tram, Ksak lab gyoy hanantuan cho bishop va yeukaw Silas kiem trakha nang huat jong kua hetongku. Chapter ke thuk ki Silas dung chies kua elise mokan fong thiet ba junk ba kua trong bon nam. 2. Pao kao ngui ko trung lap hoax kam giak templat. Ngui ko lap lai namo viek bishop tiep tuk dung va han, vijay dan Silas toy mot quiet jin. Tuin hien, chapter jantran lap nip kua fan truok bang kach. Chuyen trong tam tu bau kong kibian sang joy thoai. Jan gia itevato chukku ho thukte. Jua vao kshung jot kwan giem gua Silas. Lenora va tessa vegioi han sudang bishop. Kong tau them bi matnam trong chich gang. Vat nai chi mangi nang hia tin kam vaksak han moi lien ket voi Audrey. Ri huk chin lan han set kua Lenora. Rang bishop tim gen trem so bei chu kong chi tim Silas. Lam thay joy kach han vat chin hin kan ha. Kau trao koi chapter la quiet jin mo kan fong jan kua. Kong fai mot kwaks joy jiao hoach kam fa bang chung fam tui. Mochangui ko template repetition, tap. Threesen han vat moik swat hien Dr. Lenora Pike, shimti 6 toy, baxi thu ilu jong, bantan lau nam kua elise, tukte, thang tan va ko kanang jat gioi han voi Silas, Sheriff Wade Carver, pimpti 1 toy, kan sat truong cedar hollow, ngoi jiu han fan kan cap. Va kong cap thong tin ven hom mat tik. Tessa kleine, Warte 6 toy. Chi hui joy tim kiem ku nan mien nui, kai luat. Tan trong va yu kau moa fuong an fai juoch kiem chung. Audrey Keen, oneranti knife tuoi. Ngoi jiu kien bishop. Chua suat hien truk tiep nhung juoch gioi thieu kwa lua ke. Chiets gang va fanung kua bishop. Sao tan vien hom lien lak mua jong. Nang chuyen gia jang gi hu jang matich chung Audrey Tren North Pass. Chat. Bao kao tin hop li kuakachi, tiet Lenora ko the toy tram, so bei trong bon vi sudung seban taigan sich va jang quen lam viech taivung nui. Chan tuong kua bishop juoch gioi han hop li, chu kong gaik suong, nhung kong juoch fep tiep tuch han trin dai bang chan. Nhom matich cho li do chin jang je roikse, ong sabi tuyet chekin, tau nangai ko kong ki kong antoan trong kabin. Jipetas chihsats jin vi trichiet se. Kong de chobiet huang jikwan hom sau kiroi fuang tien. Truk thang bi jin chidongwai ko jong bang va juang bobi kaijo chan. Taon hu kau hopli cho mang lien laks du fong. Tessa van giu quen chi huing hip vu. Con Silas chi juok moi ho trove ban jova tongtin lien lak. Chich gang kua Audrey ko de maktrong dai jai bishop ki heben tachin hao. Chi tiet nai nen juok giai thik jai ju hon ki Audrey ke lai suvietso chapter sao. Tu jan gia so voi chapter 1, chapter nai kon hip han van hiu tuong tach hon. Kong gian kong kon chik so ai kwan Silas va suim lang. Mamorong sang motin huong ku ho voin hiu gioi han tukte. Lenora jai dien sho trach nhim cham sok bishop. Wade kung cap op luk thoi gian. Contessa juan guyen tak va quayen chi hui vao kau chuyen. Bishop chuyen tu vai trong guoi mang tong jiep sang mot sin vat kan juok bao ve. Jong thoi van la moi lien hetin kam voi Audrey. Silas kong kon shi joi dien ki utskan han. Ong bat jau fai kan haks trachen hiem joi voin hung nguoi jang matich. Makruai ro inauthentic content. Tap. Chapter 3. The Voices That Never Went Silent. The equipment room smelled of dust, cold metal, and the faint mineral dampness of a place sealed too long. Silas stood in the doorway without entering. The beam from Tessa's flashlight passed over paper maps pinned to corkboard walls, banks of switches, a gray VHF receiver, and wooden shelves crowded with hand-crank battery boxes. 2 coils of insulated telephone wire hung from hooks beneath a faded emergency route chart. At the center of the room sat the Winter Lantern control desk, its amber indicator lenses dark beneath a film of dust. Nothing had been removed. Nothing had been forgiven either. Elise's gray sweater still hung over the back of the operator's chair. Silas had forgotten it was there. For an instant, the room ceased to be a technical space. It became a morning 4 years earlier. Elise leaning over the console with a pencil between her teeth, complaining that the county had purchased connectors designed by someone who hated human fingers. Then Tessa stepped around him and placed her waterproof operations board on an empty shelf. What powers the system? The question was practical enough to break the memory. Originally the main line, Silas said. Battery reserve after an outage. A few remote stations used hand-crank generators. Original batteries? Some. Then assume they're dead. Silas entered the room. The floor creaked beneath his boots. He took Elise's sweater from the chair, folded it once, and placed it on a dry shelf without looking at Lenora. Tessa noticed the movement, but said nothing. Upstairs, Bishop shifted on his blanket. The tags on his harness clicked softly, followed by Lenora's voice telling him that a hallway was not a mountain, and he was still not cleared to patrol it. Silas moved behind the control desk and opened the lower access panel. Dust lifted from old wiring arranged in disciplined rows. Each cable carried Elise's handwritten labels. Main relay, north lamp, field line A, weather loop. The years had not changed her penmanship. They shut off the county feed after my report, Silas said. But I kept the station generator for the house. Can the console take power from it? Tessa asked. If the voltage regulator still holds. That sounded uncertain. It's 4 years old. Everything in this room is older than 4 years. That isn't how electronics work. It's how rescue planning works. Silas almost objected. Instead, he found himself appreciating the distinction. Tessa had no sentimental attachment to the room. She saw only capability, limitation, and time. Her skepticism was not disrespect. It was a safeguard against hope becoming a substitute for proof. Silas retrieved a portable meter from the workshop upstairs. When he returned, Lenora followed with Bishop's water bowl and a small plate of warmed food. Bishop refused both until Silas sat on the floor beside the control desk. You have created a difficult precedent, Lenora said. Silas rested one arm across his raised knee. Eat. Bishop looked at him, then lowered his head to the food. He was waiting for you, Lenora said. He was waiting for permission. There are days when those are the same thing. Bishop ate slowly. When he finished, he settled beneath the desk with his injured paw extended over Silas's boot. Silas returned to the wiring. The main storage batteries had failed exactly as Tessa predicted. One casing had split from age, another showed no charge. The mechanical switching system remained intact, however, and the generator feed produced stable output after Silas cleaned 2 corroded terminals. He connected the line. Nothing happened. Tessa checked her watch. Silas adjusted the transfer switch and tried again. A weak hum moved through the console, then faded. Useful? Tessa asked. Not yet. He removed the front panel and found a relay contact frozen in place. Elise had once warned him that the component would eventually fail because the manufacturer had saved 12 cents by using inferior plating. Silas had accused her of taking the matter personally. She had replied that engineering was personal whenever bad choices reached the public. He cleaned the contact, reseated the fuse, and pressed the system test. One amber lens flickered, then another. Across the console, 7 small lights came alive in an uneven row, their glow warm against the cold gray equipment. For the first time in 4 winters, Station 7 displayed the valley. The sight did not feel triumphant. It felt intimate. Silas had expected the room to resist him. Instead, it responded as though he had left only yesterday. Bishop raised his head beneath the desk. The amber light caught the golden line between his eyes. Tessa leaned over the panel. Are these station indicators? They show the last circuit state, not current activity. So 7 lights do not mean 7 active stations. No. Good. We agree on something. Silas activated the VHF receiver. Static filled the room. It was not the clean digital silence of a disconnected device. This static had texture, distant interference, wind over an exposed line, the faint rise and fall of signals too weak to resolve. Silas adjusted the squelch and selected the Winter Lantern frequency. Winter Lantern Network. This is Relay 7, he transmitted. Emergency traffic. Any active station, respond. The answer was noise. He repeated the call. Nothing. Tessa studied the signal meter. Could anyone hear us? If one of the repeaters is active, and if none are, then we're talking to an empty valley. He switched to a second frequency reserved for field maintenance. The receiver offered a burst of clicking, then went quiet. Tessa's doubt became visible, though not impatient. How long before we stop testing this and expand the ground search? 5 minutes. You have 3. Silas tuned the receiver by hand, moving through narrow bands where old repeaters might have drifted. His fingers remembered the machine before his mind did. A quarter turn. Pause. Listen beneath the louder noise. Reduce the gain. Wait. Static rose sharply. Then a woman's voice cut through it. 7. This is 6. You are stepping on your own tail. Reduce output by 15%. Silas stopped breathing. The voice was older, low and firm, with no trace of surprise despite answering a station believed dead for 4 years. He lowered the transmitter output. 6. Identify. A dry laugh came through the speaker. You disappear for 4 years and come back demanding identification. Lenora closed her eyes briefly. June. The signal cleared. June Bellamy, licensed operator, Relay 6, the woman said. Former Air Force navigator, current maple farmer, and apparently the only person in this valley who still remembers radio courtesy. Silas knew June's voice. He had heard it issue weather coordinates during early network exercises and argue with Elise about whether coffee counted as emergency equipment. At 68, June still ran Bellamy Maple Farm alone, except during harvest season. Silas remembered her as tall and straight-backed, with close-cropped silver hair, warm brown skin, and copper earrings that flashed whenever she turned toward a light. She had been one of the first volunteers Elise recruited. You maintained Station 6, Silas said. Correct. The network was decommissioned. The county withdrew official funding. The privately owned relay sites were transferred to our volunteer license. No one informed me. You made it clear you did not wish to be informed. Her words were not cruel. That made them harder to dismiss. Tessa leaned toward the microphone. Ms. Bellamy, this is Tessa Klein, County Mountain Rescue. We have 7 missing adults from North Pass, including Audrey Keene. June's tone changed immediately. We know. Audrey's group missed 2 scheduled check-ins. You were expecting them. They were inspecting the northern line before the festival. How many stations are active? 6 can transmit. 5 can repeat. 4 has a functioning lamp and field telephone. 2 has power but no reliable antenna. 3 has been intermittent since this afternoon. Silas stared at the amber root. Who repaired them? We did. We? Another voice entered the frequency, thin and impatient. If you two are finished discussing ownership, I would like to report that Relay 5 is receiving you at minus 87 decibels. June sighed through the speaker. Harlan, wait your turn. I am 79. I have waited for enough turns. Harlan Webb introduced himself as the frequency coordinator at Relay 5. A former telephone lineman, he had spent 40 years maintaining wire across terrain newer crews now considered inaccessible. His voice carried a nasal edge, and every transmission included the faint clink of tools nearby. Repeater 5 is passing traffic, Harlan said. 4 is answering by buried line. 3 hears us but cannot hold a clean uplink. A third voice followed, precise enough to sound as though it had been waiting beside a clock. Marion Frost, map control at Relay 4. I require the vehicle's confirmed position and last contact time. Marion had worked as a railroad dispatcher before retirement. At 72, she was famous in Cedar Hollow for remembering travel times, bridge waits, and road closures from decades earlier. Silas pictured her small frame wrapped in a long gray cardigan, silver hair pinned low, and red-framed glasses resting near the end of her nose. Tessa gave her the coordinates. Paper rustled over the radio. The abandoned research greenhouse is 11.4 miles northeast by road, Marion said. 6.2 by the old service path. There are 2 maintenance shelters closer, but one lost its roof last year. Conditions on that path? Tessa asked. A slower male voice answered. Owen Talbot, weather at Relay 2. Wind has shifted northwest. Temperature falling steadily. Upper ridges loading with fresh snow, but the eastern drainage remains stable for tracked travel. Owen, 75, had spent most of his career maintaining mountain weather instruments. He spoke without urgency, the way people did when they trusted measurements more than volume. Tessa requested his readings. Owen gave wind speed, temperature, pressure trend, and the latest data from 3 simple snow sensors. Tessa compared them with the county's digital forecast on her tablet. The numbers matched within acceptable margins. Her expression changed, not to belief, to professional interest. This network has no internet connection? She asked. Not unless the wind has learned to pay a service provider, Harlan replied. June cut in. Each station has local sensors, battery radio, a directional amber lamp, and printed maps. We pass data manually when towers fail. 2 buried field lines remain usable, Harlan added. Old copper, ugly, heavy, and not dependent on software. Marion said, Some of us kept our professional skills after our employers stopped paying for them. No one framed the work as rebellion or heroism. They described batteries, tests, and maintenance schedules. The absence of drama made the achievement more credible. Silas looked at the handwritten dates on Bishop's map. You should have told me, he said. The channel stayed silent for a beat. June answered, You recommended removing the system. I recommended retiring unsafe components. You also removed Station 7 from the chain and returned every letter unopened. Silas felt Lenora watching him. June continued, her voice quieter. We believed you wanted anything connected to Elise gone. Silas looked around the preserved room, the sweater, the notes, the pencil still lying beside the console. I didn't want it gone. No, June said. You wanted it frozen. The accuracy of the statement silenced him. Bishop moved beneath the desk and placed his paw more firmly over Silas's boot. Then the receiver gave a sharp burst of interference. Harlan spoke first. Weak carrier on 3. Tessa stepped closer. A voice emerged, broken by static. Lantern network, This is Field Group. The room became still. Silas adjusted the gain. Field Group, this is Relay 7. Repeat. The signal returned, barely holding. 7. Nadine Crowell. We reached the research greenhouse. Nadine's voice was controlled but strained. She was 70, a retired emergency room nurse and one of the missing volunteers. Wind or failing power clipped the ends of her words. Tessa took the microphone. Nadine, this is Mountain Rescue. Confirm number of people. 7. All accounted for. Relief moved through the room without releasing the tension. Medical status? Audrey has an ankle injury. Stable. Walter Sloan is cold and showing cardiac symptoms. Medication administered. We have a small generator, limited fuel. Exact location? Static swallowed the answer. Silas shifted frequencies. Nadine, repeat coordinates. Greenhouse near. The transmission fractured. A partial number came through, then silence. Tessa called again. No response. Harlan reported that Relay 3's carrier had dropped. Marion began calculating from the transmission delay between stations. Owen compared Nadine's background wind with sensor readings. June requested each station confirm the last clear reception. The voices overlapped, but did not become disorderly. Harlan identified Relay 5 as the final repeater carrying Nadine's signal. Marion measured the delay and narrowed the probable source to the eastern side of the old research corridor. Owen ruled out the higher greenhouse foundation because the wind heard behind Nadine came from a sheltered northeast exposure. Within minutes, Tessa had a search area less than 2 square miles. She looked from the paper map to her digital screen. Your network just removed 28 square miles from my search. Our network, June corrected. Tessa accepted that with a small nod. She began issuing assignments. A tracked rescue vehicle would depart from East Fork at first safe light. A second team would clear the lower access route. Lenora would remain at the forward command post to monitor Bishop and prepare for medical arrivals. Silas would travel as communications specialist. Bishop would be transported on a rescue sled and used only for brief scent confirmation on stable terrain. Lenora looked at Silas. Those limits remain mine to enforce. Tessa just enforced them for you. I enjoy competent people. Bishop had begun to drift into exhausted sleep beneath the console. Each time Silas looked toward Elise's photograph near the lamp controls, the dog's paw shifted against the cable of the headset. Silas finally put the headset on. The voices of June, Harlan, Marion, and Owen filled the room. Not ghosts, not echoes, but living people performing work they still knew how to do. Station 7 had not awakened into the past. It had rejoined something that had continued without him. Tessa folded the route plan and prepared to return upstairs. Before the frequency closed, June called Silas by name. Not Station 7, not operator. Silas. He pressed the transmit switch. I'm here. We did not keep the network alive to defy you. He waited. June's next words crossed the storm clearly. We kept it because Elise believed there would come a day when you would find your way back. Silas looked down at Bishop sleeping against his boot. The amber indicators glowed across the console. For once, he did not reach for the power switch. Wan. Tom tat noi dungbang tieng viet Silas. Tessa va Lenora buok va fong tiet bikua tram. So bay, noi moi tu van gan hunguyen ventungai Elise con song. Silas ket noi mai fat du fong, sua tiep jem biket va hoi jong lai bang ju kin tuyen jen. Saun hiu lan chin han juoch, tieng hiu. Tram so sao bat ngo tra loi. Nguoi lien lax la jun bella mi. 68 tu tuoi, ku hoa tieu, hong quan van guoi fu trach tram so sao. Junetiet lorang tuyen jen chua tuk subien mat. Sao kichin quien hat ngung taitro. Kastram tranjat tun han juok chuyen than mot mang vo tuyen tain nguyen hop hop. Harlan web fu trach tan sova mailap song. Marian Frost fu trach banjo va toi giandi chuyen. Owen Talbot, Theodoi du lieu toi tiet. Tessan hanra hetong, analog kuvan kung, cap du lieu chin, ksach va hoat jong jok lap voya internet. Junathuan han hom kong, baucho silas, viong, tong, root tram, so by koi mang luoi, va tu choi moi, lien lak lien quan jen elise. Silas bat jau hiu, rang banthan kong, muon ksua bo kwa, huma, chi muon giu no bat jong. Motain hiu yu tu nadin crowel ksaken han Audrey va saun guoi kon lai jang tru trong mot ha kin nghien ku bo huang. Walter Sloan jang chu an huang menghiem trong kua lan. Audrey bi thuang o mat ka chan van hien liu kuan hom sapkan. Tin hiu being gat truok ki nadine truyen ju toa jo. Harlan, Marian va Owen foi hop du lieu je tu hep ku vuch tim kiem tugan ba moe dam vuong suong duai hai dam vuong. Tesalap ke hoch tiep kan bang se ban sich, cho fep Silas tam gia voi vai tro chuyen vien lien lak. Kon bishop fai juok van chuyen va chidong chon hung kwang chak jin mui nangan. Chapter ke thuk ki june noe rang ho kong giu mang luoi je shong lai Silas. Ma vi elisitin mot ngai nao jo ong setim juak juong kwai lai. Tu bau kau ngu kotrong lap hoach kam giaks template. Ngoi ko lap lai nam, o vix tiep tuk sudung mot vat hoach, hitong kwa elise je tauks jai kwa tran chua lan kwa Silas. Chapter ja jiu chin bang kach. Chuyen trong tam koi bishop va vat dunkan han sang hoat jong kit thuat. Neo giong noi va su foi hop tap the. Kong dung mang vo tuyen je he lo am mu hoach bi ma toi fam. Hitong chi puk vu ku ho tukte. Kasnahan vat lon tue kong suat hien hun hung ngua yu jue kan ku malan hung chuyen gia jang truk tiep gia quiet vanje. Re huk la tin hio truk tiep tu nadine. Lam thai juai tan trang tu mat tich chuaron. Tan mot bai tuan ku hokuthe. Sung jot giwa Silas va june kong juok giai kwet ngai. Loi noi kwa june chimora mot kach hin moe. Kong soa boton tuong. Bishop giu vai trokam ksuk hon hung hiu kwa. Kong tiep tuk lam nungwan fat hien man moa chin. Muk nungai ko template repetition. Thap. 3. Nhan vat moak suat hien june bellamy. 68 tuoi. Ku hoa tio kong kwan. Hien jiu han trang trai fong va tram so sao. Quiet joan, thukte va la mo trong, nhung nguoi dui tri tu yen jen. Harlan Webb, 72 new tuoi. Kuto juong dai jien thoai, putrach tan sovakats mai lapsong. Timi, hoi kutin vako kiu hai huochko. Marian Frost, 72 tuoi, kun han vian jiu jo juong sat, putrak banjo, kuang kach va toi gian. Tu dui chin xaks, nhan va kong chap nhan thong tin moho. Owen Talbot, 75 tuoi, kuki thuat vien ki tuong, theo doi gio, nhiet jo va tin trang tuyet. Giem tin va dua tren du lieu. Nadine Crowell, 70 tuoi, ku ita fong kap ku, mot thang vien trong hom matish. Jang tu chuk cham sok moeng guoi trong ha kin. Walter Sloan, 70 andevent tuoi. Kun han vien bao tri juong sat. Kotien su bench tim va jang sui yu du lan. Moi juok nhaks jen kwatin hiu kwa nadin. 40. Bao kao tin hop li kua kach. Chitiet tram, so bei ko the hoat jong trolai vi fan mach ko hok va mai fat de fong van kon. Trong ki kach bopin ku juok ksak jin la jan hong. Silas fai kiem tranguon. Vesin tiep giem va gieu chin kong suat truok ki truyen juok tin hieu. He thong kong koi jong huan hauxangai lap tuk. Kach tram huat jong hop fap duoi giai fep vo tuyen tins nanguyen va nam tren jat tun han. Giai thich vi sao mang van ton tai sao ki hat ngong tai tro. Dulio thoi tiet kong dua vau internet malay tu cambien kuk bova juok truyan tu kong. Nadine chigui juok tin hiu yu qua mot mai hoax tram huat jong kong on jin. Fu hop voi viet juong truyen bingat giwa chung. Marian kong shak jin, toa jo chin shak chi bang, thoi gian truyen song. Baket hop jo tre tuong joy. Tram lap kuoi kong. Banjo tuyen va du liu gio kua owenje tu hep ku vuts. Chitiet nine en tiep tuk juok motan hu wok tin hiep vu. Kong fai jin vituyet joy. Tesa van lang guoi lap ke hoach vachi hui ku ho. Chats tin nguyen vien kong kap du liu chu kong tu thay the luk luong chuyen hiep. Bishop bat jau an sau kin han len tu selas la hop li voe mot chong hiep vu van dui, 3 kilua tronkin hiem vu chua juok sakn han ket tuk. Tu jan gia so voe chapter 2, chapter 9 it tap trong va o viets gioi tio moen se van hiu hon va o qua trin bien tong ten roi rak than mot ke hoach ko the han chong. Nhip ke mang tin tap the, ki tuat va jawi toai hiu giong noi. Tai cho su va cham truk tiep jua Silas, Lenora va tessa, Silas kong, kon la trung, tam dui, hat, quamwe, quiet jin. June, Harlan, Marian, Owen va Nadine, Jo Jong, Gop, Nung, Luk Rieng. Bishop Chuyen sang vaitro neo giu kam such, giup Silas olaivoa hien tai vi tiep tuch la angoi, dan juong cho kot truyen. Kam suk chin, qua chapter kong, phi bien he, kan kap thuan tui, ma la sun han ra rang, kong jong va di san qua Elise van song jong, trong, hung kon ngoi Silas tung trang ne. Much rui ro inauthentic content, thap. Chapter 4. The logbook at the cable station. Morning arrived with an almost offensive beauty. The storm had moved east before dawn, leaving Cedar Hollow beneath a hard blue sky. Sunlight struck the fresh snow and broke across the valley in sheets of white fire. Every spruce branch carried a bright edge. Ice crystals drifted from the trees without wind, flashing briefly before disappearing into the deeper snow. From the tracked rescue vehicle, Silas watched the landscape pass behind scratched windows. The mountain had spent the night hiding people. Now it looked innocent. Tessa sat in the front beside the driver, studying a laminated route map across her knees. She had exchanged her white helmet for a dark wool cap during the ride, though the helmet remained clipped within reach. Every few minutes, she checked the coordinates Marion relayed from Station 4 and compared them with the vehicle's position. 2 county technicians occupied the bench opposite Silas. Cole Danner, a communications specialist in his late 30s, had a narrow face, a short, rust-colored beard, and the habit of tapping each equipment case before securing it. Besides him, Priya Nair held the mechanical diagrams for the old cable station. She was 41, compact and steady, with black hair braided beneath a gray cap and the patient expression of someone who preferred machines because they failed for reasons that could eventually be named. Jonah Reed, the team's rescue medic, sat near the rear doors checking insulated medication packs. At 45, he had the broad hands and quiet voice of a man accustomed to meeting frightened people at their worst moments. He asked questions only when the answers would change what he did next. Bishop rode on a padded rescue sled secured to the floor. Lenora had wrapped his injured paw in a gray protective boot and fitted a navy support harness beneath the brick-red working gear. She had objected to Bishop traveling at all, then spent 20 minutes instructing everyone on exactly how he was permitted to move. No running, no climbing, no extended scent work. If the shoulder worsened, Bishop returned immediately. Before the team departed, Lenora had crouched beside him at the forward command post and touched 2 fingers to his chest. "You are allowed to be useful," she had said. "You are not allowed to be foolish." Bishop had looked past her toward Silas. Lenora followed his gaze and added, "That applies to both of you." Now Bishop lay with his head raised, amber eyes tracking the trees beyond the window. He did not struggle against the sled straps. The restraint seemed to offend him, but he had accepted it as part of the assignment. Silas understood that kind of obedience. He also understood how easily it could be mistaken for permission to demand too much. The vehicle climbed past an abandoned maple road and entered a corridor of birch trees where the snow had drifted high against the trunks. The old winter lantern route appeared occasionally beside them, not as a maintained road, but as fragments of memory embedded in the land. A wooden marker half buried near a stream, a length of dark telephone wire disappearing beneath snow, an amber glass lens mounted above the door of a storage shed. Silas had helped install all of it. He had also signed the document that declared it unnecessary. "Station 4 should be ahead," Priya said. Tessa looked up from the map. The trees opened around a low ridge, revealing the remains of the North Cedar Cable Station. Decades earlier, the building had served a small chairlift that carried forestry crews and research equipment toward the upper slopes. The lift towers still crossed the mountainside, dark steel frames standing against the brilliant sky. Most of the cable had been removed, but the station remained, a long wooden structure with a slanted roof, wide loading doors, and a control booth raised above the eastern wall. An amber lamp hung beneath the eaves. It was lit, not brightly. Daylight nearly erased it, but the warm color remained visible against the snow. Tessa noticed Silas staring. "Last test was 3 days ago," she said. "Marion confirmed it this morning." Silas climbed out after Cole cleared the steps. Cold air entered his lungs sharply. The sunlight made the temperature deceptive. Every exposed surface still carried the deep chill left by the storm. Bishop was lowered from the vehicle without being released from the sled. His ears turned toward the cable station, then toward the northern tree line. "Not yet," Tessa told him. Bishop looked at her. She held the dog's gaze with the same calm authority she used with people. "Not yet." He settled again. Inside, Station 4 was cleaner than Silas expected. Dust covered the abandoned lift machinery, but the emergency area along the southern wall had been maintained. Fresh batteries sat in insulated boxes. Printed maps were sealed behind clear covers. A hand-crank telephone occupied a shelf beside the radio set. Someone had swept the floor recently enough that boot marks remained in the thin dust. Cole tested the relay. "Signal is clean," he said. "Ugly wiring, but clean." Harlan's voice immediately came through the receiver. "The wiring is not ugly. It is accessible." Cole leaned toward the microphone. "I can see 3 different insulation colors in one splice. That is called resource management." Priya examined the old power panel and smiled faintly. "I like him." "You have poor judgment," Harlan replied. The exchange brought a brief looseness into the room. Even Tessa allowed it to remain for several seconds before directing everyone back to work. Silas moved toward the map table. A thick black logbook rested beneath a brass paperweight. It was not hidden. His name was written on a folded note tucked beneath the cover. "For Silas, when he comes." The handwriting belonged to June. He stood with one hand above the book without touching it. June's voice came through the radio from Station 6. "You found it?" Tessa looked across the room. "Is that log operationally relevant?" "Yes," June said. "Maintenance history, shelter reports, route changes." Silas opened the cover. The first pages began 4 winters earlier, 2 months after the county officially retired the network. June had documented the transfer of Station 6 to volunteer operation. Harlan recorded the repair of a damaged repeater using salvaged telephone components. Marion added a revised travel time table after a bridge closure. Owen attached handwritten pressure readings from a week when the digital sensors failed. The log continued season after season. Battery replacements, lamp inspections, wire repairs, short accounts of people helped by the network. A delivery driver guided off a closed road during freezing rain. 2 hikers directed to an emergency shelter after losing daylight. An older couple whose furnace failed during a county-wide outage. A home care nurse who reached an isolated patient because Marion remembered an abandoned rail access road. None of the entries described heroism. They described tasks, times, temperatures, names of people contacted, equipment that needed attention afterward. Silas turned the pages more slowly. He had imagined the Winter Lantern Network sitting dead beneath snow, preserved only in the private museum of his guilt. Instead, it had continued doing exactly what Elise designed it to do. People had found shelter. Voices had crossed the valley. Lights had remained on. All while Station 7 stayed dark. The realization carried no accusation from the book itself. That made the weight of it harder to resist. Bishop gave a low breath from the sled. Silas looked across the station. The dog was watching him, not the door. For the first time since Bishop arrived, Silas felt no expectation in that gaze, only attention. The difference mattered. Silas returned to the log. Near the center, the handwriting changed. Elise's narrow, slanted letters ran across 3 pages of technical notes. The date was the day before her death. Silas recognized the entry because he had seen the first half years earlier on a duplicate worksheet. Station 2 sensor dropped offline at 1840. Replacement regulator tested and packed. Weather expected to hold until after midnight. "I'll take the lower service road and return before the freeze." Beneath it, she had listed the tools, spare connectors, and fuel she intended to carry. The next line stopped him. Silas has been awake nearly 40 hours between the hospital generator call and the county repeater failure. I told him to sleep. No reason for 2 exhausted people to make a simple repair. Silas read the sentence again. The room seemed to contract around the page. For 4 years, he had built the same version of that night. Elise had called. He had failed to answer. Therefore, she had gone alone, because he had failed her. The logic had become so familiar that he no longer examined the spaces between its parts. But Elise's entry did not say she had waited for him. It did not say he had refused her. She had made the decision before he fell asleep. She had chosen to go because she believed the repair routine and the weather manageable. She had also chosen to protect him from his own exhaustion. That truth did not absolve him. His phone had been silent. Elise had later called and asked him to activate the backup receiver. Had he heard it, perhaps the response would have changed. Perhaps it would not. The page could not answer that. No page could. Silas turned to the final entry. The ink was slightly smudged at the edge, as though Elise had closed the book before it fully dried. The new county system is faster. Winter Lantern is harder to break. Silas understands both. He listens to equipment the way some people listen to music, but he hears trouble in human voices too, even when he pretends not to. A line had been added beneath it. When he is ready, let him find his own way back. Do not drag him. He will only dig in his heels and complain about the route. Despite himself, Silas heard Elise's humor in the sentence. His throat tightened. The final words were simpler. He knows the new signals and the old roads. The valley will need both. Silas closed his eyes. The relief he had expected never came. Instead, anger rose. Cleaner than grief, warmer, and directed somewhere outside himself for the first time in years. He pressed the radio switch. June. I'm here. You had this. Yes. For 4 years. Yes. Why? The station fell quiet except for the low hum of the relay. June answered without softening her voice. Because when Elise died, you were taking the system apart piece by piece. I submitted a safety report. You removed Station 7 in 1 week. There were failures. There was grief. Silas's hand tightened around the microphone. You decided I couldn't be trusted with my wife's words. I decided you might destroy the only copy before you could read them. The statement landed harder than an excuse would have. Tessa glanced toward the technicians. Cole and Priya had turned deliberately toward the power panel. Jonah continued checking his medical pack, granting Silas privacy without pretending not to hear. You had no right, Silas said. No, June replied. I did not. He had prepared himself for resistance. Her agreement left him nowhere to place the next blow. June continued. I believed I was protecting Elise's work. I also believed I was protecting you. Those are explanations, not permission. I may have been wrong. Silas looked down at the closed logbook. You let me believe a lie. I let you remain alone with the conclusion you had already chosen. That is not better. No. June's voice remained steady, but he heard strain beneath it now. I am sorry, Silas. Not because you are angry, because I made a decision about your life without you. The apology did not repair anything. It did, however, refuse to hide from the damage. Silas placed the microphone down. He was not ready to forgive June. He was not ready to forgive himself either. But the old certainty had cracked. The belief that one missed call explained everything no longer fit the full shape of the night. A sharp movement came from Bishop. The dog had raised his head toward the rear loading doors. His nose tested the air that moved through a gap in the frame. Tessa noticed immediately. Lenora cleared 5 minutes of scent work on level ground, she said. Jonah checked Bishop's shoulder support while Cole opened the loading door. Cold sunlight flooded the station. Tessa clipped a long line to Bishop's harness and helped him down from the sled. His first steps were measured. He tested the wrapped paw, adjusted his weight, then lowered his nose near the threshold. Silas held Audrey's glove from the night before beneath the dog's nose. Bishop inhaled once. Then he moved north along the side of the station. No pulling. No frantic urgency. He worked slowly, separating scent from wind and cold wood. Tessa maintained the line while Silas walked beside them. Near the edge of the old cable platform, Bishop stopped. A second brick-red glove lay partly buried beneath fresh snow. The initials inside matched the first. Bishop picked it up gently. Ahead, the maintenance trail divided around a stand of spruce. The western branch descended toward the main road. The northern branch followed the abandoned cable line toward higher ground. Bishop did not attempt to continue. He turned, carried the glove back to Silas, and placed it directly into his open hand. Then the dog looked at Tessa. He waited. Silas felt the meaning of that restraint more strongly than he would have felt a desperate pull toward the trees. Bishop wanted Audrey, But wanting her did not erase training, injury, or trust. He had done his part. Now he expected the people around him to do theirs. Tessa crouched beside the trail and studied the disturbed snow beneath the trees. The northern route connects with the old service corridor, she said. That places the greenhouse beyond Slate Cut. Priya opened the mechanical map. The main access crosses the lower bridge. Tessa shook her head. County team inspected it at dawn. One section shifted during the storm. Passable on foot? Silas asked. Not with a medical evacuation. Marion's voice came through Tessa's radio, confirming an older maintenance route near Station 5. It approached Slate Cut from the eastern side and connected with the cable service corridor above the damaged bridge. Tessa marked the new route. We proceed to 5, then evaluate the crossing. She looked at Bishop. Back on the sled. The dog did not resist. Inside the station, Silas wrapped the second glove with the first and placed both in a waterproof evidence pouch, not as evidence of wrongdoing, but as personal property to return to Audrey. He lifted the logbook. For a moment, he considered leaving it where it had survived without him. Instead, he placed it inside his field pack. The anger remained. So did regret. But neither had the authority to stop the rescue. Silas secured the pack, checked the cable on his radio, and followed Tessa toward the vehicle. Behind them, Station 4's amber lamp continued to shine in the clear winter sun. For years, Silas had treated the past like a locked room. Enter it, and everything inside would take him down with it. Now he understood that the more dangerous choice had been standing outside the door forever. Chapter 5. The Greenhouse Beyond the Cut. The route from Station 4 narrowed until the tracked vehicle could go no farther. Beyond that point, the old maintenance road existed mostly as a suggestion beneath the snow, a shallow depression between fir trees, marked by occasional iron posts and lengths of cable emerging from frozen ground. Sunlight still filled the upper slopes, but mist had begun gathering in the lower folds of the mountain. Marion guided them through the radio. Stay east of the broken retaining wall, she said. The western branch looks shorter on modern maps, but it ends above an old drainage channel. Tessa walked beside the vehicle, checking the terrain with a probe, before signaling the driver forward. Silas followed with a portable radio against his chest. Cole and Priya rode near the equipment cases, while Jonah remained beside Bishop's rescue sled. Owen's weather reports arrived every 10 minutes. Wind holding from the northwest, he said. Cold air is settling into Slate Cut. You will lose sunlight there before the ridge does. His voice remained calm, but the numbers behind it were less comforting. The temperature had stopped rising despite the clear sky. Once the sun dropped behind the western ridge, the gorge would become a channel for cold air draining from the upper mountain. Silas looked toward Bishop. The German shepherd lay beneath a thermal cover, head raised, ears turning toward every change in the vehicle's engine. The dog's wrapped paw rested over the edge of the sled. He appeared frustrated by the slow pace, but he no longer attempted to stand each time the group stopped. Perhaps he had learned that restraint could also be part of finishing a task. Perhaps Silas was the one learning it. The maintenance corridor ended at Station 5, a low concrete structure built into the hillside. Its amber lamp remained dark in daylight, but the repeater inside passed Harlan's voice clearly. Your current position is 300 yards south of the cable approach, Harlan said. The old service track continues behind the eastern wall. Priya unfolded the mechanical drawings recovered from Station 4. The cable line was built to move soil samples and equipment to the research greenhouse, she said. Not passengers. Could it carry a rescue litter? Tessa asked. Only after inspection. That means no one uses it until you say so. Priya nodded. They left the vehicle beneath the shelter of the station wall. Cole and Jonah transferred their equipment to smaller sleds. Bishop remained on his padded carrier, while Silas and Tessa took the lead along the narrow service path. The snow changed near Slate Cut. It became thinner and harder, polished by wind. Dark stone appeared through the surface in long, slanted bands. The trees also changed, giving way to low spruce bent permanently toward the east. Then the ground ended. Slate Cut opened beneath them in a wide break through the mountain. It was not the deepest gorge in the White Mountains, but its walls fell steeply enough that the bottom disappeared beneath mist and dark trees. A creek moved somewhere below, audible only as a muted rush beneath ice. Across the gap stood the greenhouse. The structure occupied a ledge on the far side, its long glass roof partly buried under snow. Many panes had been replaced with cloudy plastic over the years, giving the building the patched appearance of something repeatedly repaired but never restored. A narrow chimney released a faint thread of exhaust. One light glowed inside. Weak, yellow, alive. Tessa raised binoculars. I have movement. Silas took them. At first he saw only reflections moving over the greenhouse panels. Then a figure appeared behind the western window and lifted an arm. A second person joined the first. The glass distorted their faces, but the deliberate movement was unmistakable. Silas pressed the radio switch. Field Group, this is Station 7 team at the south edge of Slate Cut. Do you receive? Static answered. He tried the backup frequency. Nothing. Cole erected a compact directional antenna and angled it toward the greenhouse. The receiver caught a weak carrier, but no clear voice. The rock wall is blocking the signal, he said. We're hearing reflections, not a direct path. Across the gorge, the figure at the window disappeared. A moment later, the weak interior light went dark. Jonah lowered Bishop's sled beside a stone outcrop. A generator? Maybe fuel conservation, Tessa said. The darkness lasted several seconds. Then a lantern flashed behind the window. One long pulse, two short, one long. Silas recognized the old winter lantern field code. All accounted for. Another sequence followed. Two short. Pause. Three short. Medical need. Tessa took the signal card from her operations pouch and read the pattern herself before looking at Silas. They're organized enough to communicate. For now. A final series appeared. One short pulse repeated 7 times. 7 people inside. The light went dark again. Silas lowered the binoculars. Until that moment, the missing group had existed through coordinates, radio fragments, and names spoken from distant stations. Now they were human silhouettes behind cold glass, watching the rescue team from less than 200 yards away. Close enough to see, too far to reach, Tessa ordered the team to establish a safe working perimeter. Priya and Cole moved toward the remains of the cable system, while Jonah set up a medical staging area behind the rock outcrop. The original line crossed Slate Cut between 2 steel support frames. A thick main cable still stretched above the gorge, dark with ice. On the rescue side, the cable entered a small winch house built into the slope. A second support line disappeared into the far greenhouse wall. Priya examined the anchor plates, tapping ice away with a small hammer and checking for movement around the bolts. Cole opened the winch housing. The mechanism inside had not turned in years. Its steel drum was intact, but frost covered the brake assembly. Electrical cables entered through a conduit beneath the floor, their insulation stiff from cold. Tessa stood at the doorway. Can it be made safe? Priya did not answer immediately. She measured the visible cable, checked the anchor base, then studied the old load plate fixed to the wall. The main line was rated above what we need, assuming corrosion has not weakened the hidden sections. We'll test it before putting anyone on it. And the winch? The motor might run. The brake will not release while it's frozen. Cole traced the electrical feed. We could warm the brake housing and cycle the motor under no load. Our portable generator? Tessa asked. Not enough output for both. The county unit had been chosen to power lights, radios, and medical heaters. It could run the winch motor briefly or supply heat to thaw the brake, but not both at the level Priya considered safe. Can we alternate? Silas asked. Priya shook her head. The brake may refreeze between cycles. I need stable heat while testing the motor. What about the greenhouse generator? Jonah asked. Wrong side of the gorge, Cole said. And judging by that exhaust, they're barely keeping it running. Tessa stepped outside and looked across the gap. No one suggested building a temporary bridge. No one proposed tying ropes to nearby trees and trusting courage to compensate for engineering. The gorge did not care how urgently they wanted to cross it. Tessa returned to the winch house. Inventory every power source. Cole began listing batteries, converters, and cable lengths. Priya reviewed the Station 5 diagrams. Silas already knew the answer. The gray protective case sat on the rear equipment sled. Priya had recovered it from a locked cabinet at Station 4 before the team departed. The faded label identified it only as an auxiliary power control assembly. She had brought it because the cable station diagrams called for a controller capable of balancing the winch motor against the heating circuit. Silas had not told her what the box contained. He walked back to the sled. Bishop watched him approach. The gray case was long and shallow, sealed by 4 metal latches. Scratches marked the corners, but the weather gasket remained intact. A strip of white tape ran across the lid. Elise had written 2 words on it. Lantern Bridge. The name had been a joke. The controller was never intended for a bridge. Elise had built it as an experimental load balancer for emergency stations that needed to run several high-demand devices from one unstable generator. The prototype could redirect power in fractions of a second, preventing a motor startup from shutting down heat or communications equipment. It had been her most elegant piece of work. Silas remembered the week she assembled it at their kitchen table. She had spread wires, circuit boards, and coffee cups across every usable surface. When he complained there was nowhere left to eat, she told him civilization had advanced beyond plates. After her death, he found the controller at Station 4, where she had left it following a field test. He had sealed it inside the cabinet rather than return it to her workshop. The device remained exactly as she had built it. Untouched, useful only in theory. Bishop shifted on the sled and placed his nose against the edge of the case. Silas sat beside him. Across slate cut, a figure appeared behind the greenhouse window again. Even without the binoculars, he could see the movement of an arm against the pale panel. Audrey might have been standing there. He imagined her injured ankle, Nadine counting Walter's pulse, 6 older adults taking turns near a failing heater while daylight withdrew from the gorge. The controller could power the winch and brake system, but not in its current form. The original military-style connectors did not match the cable station circuits. Cole and Priya would have to remove the outer casing, cut Elise's wiring harness, and separate the load channels. Once opened and modified in the field, the prototype would never return to the same arrangement. Silas ran his thumb over Elise's handwriting. He had spent years preserving objects because objects did not change their stories. The watch still lost 3 seconds. The sweater remained folded in the equipment room. The controller still held each wire where Elise's hands had placed it. People were different. People moved on, misunderstood, apologized too late, and continued living in ways the dead could no longer supervise. Objects asked less. That was why he had trusted them with so much grief. Tessa approached, but stopped several feet away. Priya says that unit may work. It will. Can we connect it? Yes. What does it cost? Silas looked at her. Tessa's question was not technical. She has to open it. Tessa waited. It won't be intact afterward, he said. What happens if we don't use it? Maybe another county generator reaches us before dark. East Fork is still blocked. Best estimate is 4 hours. The gorge would lose daylight in less than 2. Tessa continued in the same measured tone. Owen expects the temperature to fall quickly after sunset. The greenhouse fuel may last several hours, but Nadine reported Walter is already struggling with the cold. She did not tell Silas what Elise would have wanted. She did not call the decision obvious. We can continue looking for another option, Tessa said, but I need to be honest about the time that we'll use. Silas looked at Bishop. The dog's attention moved from him to the distant greenhouse. No signal. No paw against the case. Only a tired animal watching the place where his handler waited. Silas realized he had been expecting Bishop to decide for him. That would have been easier, but loyalty did not remove choice. It made choice matter. Elise had not designed the controller so it could remain perfect inside a locked cabinet. She had built it because electrical systems failed under pressure, and people still needed warmth, light, and a way home. Silas lifted the case. It was heavier than he remembered. He carried it to the winch house and placed it on the workbench in front of Priya. She looked at the writing on the lid, then at him. I'll have to cut the original harness. I know. The enclosure may be damaged when we mount the new terminals. I know. Priya rested both hands beside the case. Once I begin, I cannot preserve it as a complete prototype. Silas opened the first latch. The click sounded small inside the frozen building. Then the second. He stopped before the third. For a moment, he saw Elise at their kitchen table, silver pencil behind one ear, refusing to accept that a machine had only one possible use. He had loved that quality in her when it solved problems. He had resented it when it kept taking her into the winter. Both things could be true. Silas released the final latches and stepped back. Take it apart. Priya opened the lid. Inside, the wiring remained arranged in Elise's careful color-coded arcs. Small, handwritten labels identified every circuit. Cole leaned closer, admiration momentarily overcoming the urgency of the situation. She built this by hand? Yes. Priya removed the first connector. Silas turned away when the cutters closed around the original harness. The sound was not dramatic, just a clean metallic snap. Yet something inside him reacted as though a final boundary had been crossed. Work continued quickly. Cole ran heavy cable from the controller to the winch motor. Priya separated the heating circuit and mounted temporary insulated terminals. Silas checked the voltage profile and adjusted Elise's mechanical load dial. The prototype no longer looked like a finished device. Its casing lay open. Wires extended beyond the original frame. 2 of Elise's labels had been removed to make space for new connections. The controller had lost its shape. It had not lost its purpose. Ready for low-load test, Priya said. Tessa ordered everyone clear of the cable line. Cole started the portable generator. Silas engaged the controller. The brake heater drew power first. A faint warmth entered the frozen housing. Ice began sliding from the metal in clear fragments. When Priya activated the winch motor, the load needle jumped. But instead of cutting power to the heater, Elise's controller balanced both circuits. The steel drum turned, slowly, then steadily. Across slate cut, the greenhouse's weak yellow light flickered. Silas adjusted the output. The light strengthened. It spread through the patched roof panels, warm against the blue shadow filling the gorge. Figures moved behind the glass. One raised both arms. Another brought the signal lantern to the western window. 3 long pulses crossed the distance. Power received. Bishop pushed himself upright on the sled. His body trembled with effort, but his eyes remained fixed on the illuminated greenhouse. Silas rested a hand against the dog's shoulder harness. The gray case on the workbench was no longer a relic. It was open, altered, and surrounded by temporary cables. For one sharp moment, Silas felt the loss of it. Then he looked across the gorge and saw 7 shadows gathering beneath the brighter light. Elise's last prototype would never again sit untouched inside its protective case. But on the far side of Slate Cut, it was keeping people warm. The object had been changed beyond restoration. The reason she built it had survived. Chapter 6. Across the amber light. Tessa would not allow the first person onto the cable until the system had failed safely 3 times. Priya tested the brake under partial load, then full load. Cole monitored the motor temperature while Silas adjusted Elise's opened controller from the winch house. A rescue cradle loaded with equipment cases crossed Slate Cut, stopped halfway, returned, and crossed again. On the 3rd test, Tessa ordered Priya to cut power without warning. The brake caught. The cradle swung once above the mist and became still. Only then did Tessa approve the evacuation. "No improvisation," she said over the radio. "No changes to passenger order without medical approval. Everyone remains clipped in until ground crew releases them." Across the gorge, Nadine acknowledged with 3 flashes from the greenhouse lantern. The amber lamp above Station 5 shone through the growing afternoon shadow. Its light was no longer bright enough to guide anyone by itself, but it gave both sides a fixed point to watch. Jonah prepared a padded transport platform for Bishop. The German shepherd attempted to rise when the cradle returned empty. His shoulder trembled beneath the support harness, yet his amber eyes remained fixed on the greenhouse. Lenora's voice came over Tessa's radio from the forward command post. "Transport only. No jumping out when he sees Audrey." "I'll explain it to him," Jonah said. "You'll secure him properly," Lenora replied. "He already understands more than most of you." Bishop was clipped into the platform with enough room to lie comfortably, but not stand during the crossing. A thermal blanket covered his back. Jonah checked the injured paw and placed Audrey's 2 recovered gloves beside him. Silas crouched at the edge of the platform. "Relay secure," he said. Bishop's ears shifted toward him. "Find Audrey." The winch engaged. The platform moved away from the south ledge. Bishop did not struggle. He lay low as the cable carried him above the gorge, watching the greenhouse grow larger. Mist moved below him in pale currents. The only sounds were the motor, the measured click of the cable guides, and Harlan reporting power draw through the radio. At the far station, several figures waited behind the loading frame. The moment Bishop reached the platform, a woman in a brick-red rescue jacket moved forward on one good leg. Audrey Keene was 39, lean and athletic despite nearly a day spent in the cold. Her dark hair had come loose from its braid, and exhaustion had hollowed the skin beneath her amber-brown eyes. One ankle was wrapped inside a temporary brace, She leaned on the shoulder of Nadine Crowell, but pushed the support away as soon as the cradle locked. Bishop tried to stand. Audrey dropped to her knees before he could. He did not bark or pull against the clips. He pressed his head into the center of her chest and became completely still. Audrey closed both arms around his neck. "I know," she whispered. "I know what I asked you to do." Bishop leaned harder against her. "I'm sorry I sent you away." The dog's eyes closed for one brief second. From the south ledge, Silas watched through binoculars. The reunion held none of the excitement people often expected from working dogs. Bishop did not leap or circle. Audrey did not praise him loudly. They remained together in quiet contact, like two members of the same team confirming that the other had survived. When Jonah's voice came through the far side radio asking for Bishop's condition, Audrey cleared her throat before answering. Tired, alert, paw protected, shoulder stable. Her professional tone returned before her hands released the dog. Then Bishop did what he had been trained to do. He turned from Audrey and inspected the room. Nadine offered the back of her hand. Bishop smelled it, then moved carefully toward the others. Nadine was 70, with a compact, capable build and short silver curls flattened beneath a wool cap. A red medical bag crossed her purple winter coat. Her dark eyes remained alert even when fatigue pulled at the corners. She had organized the greenhouse into sections. The healthiest members sat near the outer walls, wrapped in blankets. Those needing closer observation stayed beside the generator and improvised heater. Water containers had been grouped away from the coldest glass. Medication times were written in pencil across the back of a plant inventory sheet. Beside the generator sat Earl Bennett, 74, a retired diesel mechanic with thick white eyebrows and grease darkening the fingers of his wool gloves. He had kept the small engine working by cleaning the fuel line and rebuilding a damaged connector with wire taken from an unused irrigation panel. The other three volunteers, Ruth Calder, Paul Emery, and Marta Boone, were exhausted but stable. Each had spent the night taking turns clearing snow from the exhaust vent, tending the heater, and watching the old greenhouse roof for shifting ice. Walter Sloan lay on a padded bench near the center aisle. At 77, he still had the large hands and broad frame of a man who had spent 40 years maintaining railroad lines. Age had rounded his shoulders, but it had not reduced the stubbornness in his pale blue eyes. His skin looked drawn from cold and fatigue. Bishop approached him slowly. Walter rested one hand on the dog's back. "That the fellow who went for help?" Audrey nodded. Walter looked down at Bishop. "Smarter than the committee that approved this inspection." Earl raised a hand from beside the generator. "You voted for it." "I was misinformed." The exchange earned a few tired smiles. On the south side, Tessa established the evacuation order after consulting Jonah and Nadine. Ruth would cross first, followed by Marta, Paul, and Earl. Audrey could wait because her ankle was stable. Walter required the largest rescue basket, medical monitoring, and an attendant. Silas crossed in the equipment cradle after the first two evacuees. Tessa needed someone at the far winch frame who understood the controller, cable signals, and manual brake release. Silas also carried a stronger field radio, so the greenhouse side would no longer depend on reflected transmissions. When he entered the greenhouse, Audrey recognized him immediately. "Station 7, she said. "Silas Mercer." "I know." She glanced toward Bishop. He remembered. He remembered the route and the command. Audrey lowered her voice. "I wasn't sure the station would answer." Silas looked through the patched glass toward the amber light across the gorge. "Neither was I." There was no time for more. The evacuation continued. Each crossing required the same sequence. Secure passenger, confirm brake temperature, verify cable tension, close the cradle gate, transmit readiness, move. Marion tracked departure and arrival times from Station 4. June repeated confirmations across the network so no station missed a change. Owen supplied wind readings and warned that a stronger front was moving over the western ridge. Estimated arrival at Slate Cut in 32 minutes, he said. Tessa responded, "We'll be clear before then." Her voice allowed no alternative. By the time Earl reached the south ledge, only Nadine, Walter, Audrey, Silas, and Bishop remained in the greenhouse. Walter had watched every crossing. With each departure, he had moved farther from the window. When Jonah sent the larger medical basket across, Walter refused to look at it. "No," he said. Nadine knelt beside him. "Walter, we discussed this. I've discussed many poor ideas in my life." His breathing became shallow. Silas understood that the resistance was not stubbornness alone. Walter had worked on the railroad for 4 decades. Years earlier, a maintenance platform had shifted beneath him over a river bridge. He survived, but since then he had avoided heights whenever possible. He could repair track along the mountain edge without complaint, as long as solid ground remained beneath his boots. The rescue basket offered no such certainty. "I can wait for the road crew," Walter said. "The road may not open tonight," Nadine replied. "I have enough fuel." Earl's repaired generator coughed behind them, contradicting him. Nadine checked Walter's pulse. "You do not have enough warmth." Walter looked toward the basket and turned away again. Bishop moved from Audrey's side. He crossed the greenhouse slowly and lowered himself beside Walter's boots. The dog did not touch him at first. He simply rested on the floor, breathing in a calm, regular rhythm. Walter looked down. Bishop placed one paw lightly across the toe of his boot. The older man's shoulders lowered by a fraction. Audrey watched from the aisle. "He does that when someone's trying too hard not to be afraid," she said. Walter gave her a tired look. "Then he has misunderstood me completely." Bishop remained where he was. After several seconds, Walter placed his large hand against the dog's back. His breathing gradually matched Bishop's. Nadine did not rush him. "The medical basket is rated for 3 adults," she said. "I'll be beside you. Bishop can be secured on the padded deck." Walter looked at the dog rather than the gorge. "He stays?" "He stays." That was the answer Walter needed. The loading took several minutes. Nadine clipped herself into the attendant position. Walter lay beneath insulated blankets, one hand still resting on Bishop's side. Audrey secured Bishop's harness to the padded inner rail so his injured shoulder would not take any sudden movement. Silas closed the gate. "Look at him," he told Walter. "Not below." Walter nodded once. The basket moved out over Slate Cut. For the first third of the crossing, everything held steady. Then the winch slowed. A warning light appeared on Silas's portable controller monitor. Ice had begun forming again around the outer brake housing as cold wind entered the cut. Harlan's voice came through the radio. "Load balance is shifting. Heater circuit is dropping below minimum." Silas opened the field panel. "Motor is drawing high." "Reduce travel speed 8%, Harlan said. "Then increase heater output gradually. Do not switch it all at once." Silas adjusted the load dial. Across the gorge, the basket continued moving. Marion counted the remaining distance. Owen revised the wind arrival to 21 minutes. June kept every relay silent except for essential traffic. The controller needle wavered, then settled. The brake housing warmed. The basket resumed normal speed. Walter did not look down. His hand remained spread across Bishop's back until Jonah and Tessa pulled the basket onto the south platform. The moment the gate opened, Walter said, "I would like the record to show that I disliked every second." Jonah checked him. "The record can show anything you want." Bishop raised his head toward the greenhouse. Audrey was still there. Tessa ordered the basket returned for the final passengers. Silas remained on the far side to secure the system after departure. Audrey objected immediately. "You go first." "I have to release the auxiliary lock after the basket leaves." "I'm not leaving you here alone. You aren't responsible for me. I'm responsible for everyone on this side." Silas understood the answer, because he had used versions of it for years. He looked across the gorge, where Bishop stood inside the south shelter with Jonah holding his support harness. "Bishop left you because you asked him to trust that you would protect the group," Silas said. "Now he's waiting because he trusts you to finish." Audrey looked at the dog. Bishop did not pull toward her. He stood quietly beside Walter, eyes fixed across the distance. The decision passed between them without command. Audrey entered the basket. "I expect you on the next maintenance chair," she told Silas. "You'll see me there." The cradle carried her across. Silas released the auxiliary lock, transferred the controller to local hold, and used the smaller service chair for the final crossing. Priya reeled in the loose lines the moment he reached the south ledge. The stronger wind arrived less than 5 minutes later. It swept through Slate Cut, driving ice crystals against the rock and making the main cable hum. Tessa ordered the temporary guidance lines removed before they could freeze into place. No one cheered. There was only work. Blankets were distributed. Jonah and Nadine monitored Walter. Audrey sat in the snow beside Bishop, one hand resting on his brick-red harness. The other volunteers leaned against equipment cases, too tired to speak. Silas returned to the winch house. Elise's controller remained connected, its original casing open and its carefully arranged wiring altered beyond restoration. Several cut labels lay on the bench beside unused terminals. Silas picked up one small metal plate bearing the faded words, "Lantern Bridge." He placed it in his pocket. He did not gather the remaining pieces. The modified controller continued powering the amber lamps along the departure route, while the rescue team prepared to leave the mountain. Across the snow, Walter's hand rose and fell with Bishop's steady breathing. Silas watched the light from the open device pass through temporary cables and into the winter darkness. Memory, he understood, did not survive because nothing touched it. It survived because someone carried its purpose forward. Chapter 7. A Community Learns to Listen. Walter Sloan spent 4 days under observation at Cedar Hollow Regional Hospital. By the second morning, he was arguing about the temperature of the coffee. Nadine took that as a favorable sign. Jonah took it as proof that hospital staff deserved better pay. The cold had placed strain on Walter's heart, but no lasting damage was found. His doctors adjusted his medication and ordered several quiet weeks at home. Walter accepted the instructions with the expression of a man agreeing only because the alternative involved additional paperwork. Audrey's recovery took longer. The injury to her ankle was more serious than she had first admitted inside the greenhouse. She wore a brace for 6 weeks, attended physical therapy twice a week, and temporarily surrendered field command of Bishop to another certified handler. Bishop did not return to duty at all. Lenora kept him at her clinic during the first days after the rescue, where the damaged paw could remain clean and the bruised shoulder could be monitored. His bed sat behind the reception desk, rather than in the treatment area because he became restless whenever he could not see the front door. Silas visited on the second afternoon. He brought no flowers, dog treats, or dramatic expression of gratitude. He carried a repaired heater for Lenora's examination room and a small piece of rubber matting cut to fit beneath Bishop's bed. "The floor gets cold near the door," he explained. Lenora looked at the mat, then at him. "You could simply say you came to see him." "I also repaired the heater." "Of course you did." Bishop raised his head at Silas's voice. The dog did not try to stand. Lenora had made obedience to recovery part of his temporary assignment. Silas sat beside the bed. Bishop rested one paw against the toe of his boot. For several minutes, neither of them appeared to require anything else. 3 months later, Bishop was cleared for limited work. He would no longer perform long mountain searches in severe weather. But retirement was not necessary. Audrey began retraining him for shorter scent exercises, emergency shelter demonstrations, and visits with people recovering from winter-related accidents. Walter became the first person to request such a visit. When Bishop entered Walter's living room, the older man remained seated in his railway chair and pretended to be interested in a magazine. Bishop crossed the room, placed one paw over Walter's boot, and waited. Walter lowered the magazine. "You remember too much," he said. Bishop settled beside him. The rescue at Slate Cut became public news across the county, but Tessa refused to let the story become a legend about obsolete equipment saving the day through luck. At the first review meeting, she stood before the county emergency board with maps, cable reports, and a list of every failure that had complicated the operation. "The Winter Lantern Network did not replace the digital system," she said. "It filled gaps after the primary system lost coverage. It worked because people maintained it, knew its limitations, and used it alongside trained rescue personnel." She also made clear what the network could not do. Several cables needed replacement. 2 station buildings had structural concerns. Battery storage did not meet current standards. Volunteer communications lacked a unified schedule, and no formal procedure existed for transferring information into the county command system. The board did not restore Winter Lantern that day. Instead, it authorized an inspection. That decision began nearly a year of work. County engineers tested every relay. Old batteries were removed and replaced with safer units. Damaged telephone lines were mapped rather than assumed functional. The analog radios remained, but new connectors allowed their reports to feed directly into the county emergency center. The amber lamps were fitted with efficient bulbs while retaining manual switches and hand crank backups. Tessa wrote the operating procedures herself. Every volunteer had a defined role. Every transmission followed a shared format. Every station maintained a paper log and a digital duplicate. Mountain Rescue remained responsible for field decisions, while Winter Lantern provided local observations, alternate communications, and route knowledge. Nobody was permitted to call it a miracle. Harlan Webb approved of that rule. "Miracles are difficult to test," he told the first group of trainees. "Repeaters are merely annoying." The trainees were not children brought in for a sentimental photograph. They were adults from the fire department, road crews, farms, and public utilities, people likely to be present when winter disrupted normal systems. Harlan taught them how to diagnose a weak signal without immediately replacing the radio. His white mustache moved sharply whenever someone called a physical dial old-fashioned. Marion Frost built a course in paper map navigation. She covered a long table with topographic sheets and removed everyone's phones before the lesson began. "A battery percentage is not a personality," she said. "Stop trusting it like one." Owen Talbot organized a network of weather observers across the valley. Participants recorded wind direction, pressure changes, snowfall depth, and surface conditions using simple instruments. Owen compared their reports with official forecasts, not to compete with modern meteorology, but to add details that distant sensors sometimes missed. June Bellamy became the volunteer coordinator. She was given the honorary title only after Tessa informed her that honorary titles did not excuse anyone from schedules, equipment inspections, or safety rules. June accepted this without complaint. She also stopped making decisions on Silas's behalf. The change first became visible on a rainy afternoon in May. Silas was replacing damaged wiring in the Station 7 basement when June arrived carrying a box of approved fuses. She descended the stairs, stopped outside the open equipment room, and waited. Silas looked up from the console. "You can come in." June did not move. "I'm asking." The words held more weight than their size. For years, June had believed she knew what Silas could survive, what he needed protected, and when he should be allowed access to Elise's work. Her apology at Station 4 had acknowledged the harm. Standing at the doorway acknowledged the boundary. Silas set down his screwdriver. "Yes," he said. "Come in." June entered and placed the fuses on the workbench. They did not discuss the logbook that day. They repaired the north lamp circuit. Their relationship improved in similar pieces. June gave Silas information without deciding what he should do with it. Silas answered her calls even when he had no useful response. They disagreed about equipment, schedules, and whether Station 6 required a new roof. Trust did not return as a revelation. It returned as a collection of ordinary promises kept. Silas reopened Station 7 on 2 designated days each week. At first, he called it a technical workspace. Then folding chairs appeared. Marion brought map cases. Harlan left tools in 3 different cabinets and denied responsibility for all of them. Owen stored weather logs beside the kitchen. Nadine placed an updated first aid kit near the entrance. The second chair at Silas's table was no longer the only one in use. Some afternoons, the station became louder than he preferred. Volunteers argued about routes. Radios interrupted conversations. Someone always left a coffee cup where it did not belong. Silas discovered that irritation and loneliness were not opposites. He also discovered he preferred irritation. Lenora visited during Bishop's exercises and remained after the medical work was finished. She brought veterinary forms, complained about Silas's coffee, and occasionally fell asleep in the chair beside the stove while waiting for weather to clear. Their friendship developed without either of them trying to name it as something larger. Silas learned that Lenora took her tea without sugar. Lenora learned that he sometimes needed company without conversation. Neither treated affection as a replacement for Elise. There was no replacement. That was not what continuing meant. At Lenora's insistence, Silas also attended a support group for people who had lost spouses. The meetings took place twice a month in a library room above the Cedar Hollow Town Hall. On his first evening, Silas sat nearest the door and spoke only when asked to introduce himself. "My name is Silas," he said. "My wife was Elise." He did not return for 3 weeks. Then he returned. For several meetings, he listened to people describe ordinary losses, empty sides of beds, recipes no longer cooked, arguments remembered more clearly than apologies. Their grief did not resemble his exactly, which made it easier to believe none of them were performing it incorrectly. One evening, the group leader asked what habit had become hardest to release. Silas stared at his hands. "I thought staying alone was proof I hadn't forgotten her," he said. No one corrected him. No one hurried to explain what Elise would have wanted. The sentence remained in the room until Silas was ready to breathe after it. He still had days when he locked Station 7 and ignored the telephone. He still woke some nights believing he had heard Elise moving in the basement. He still checked the field watch on his right wrist and felt the familiar tightening when the second hand lost its expected 3 seconds. The difference was that he no longer treated those moments as orders. A year after the rescue, Cedar Hollow held its winter festival beneath a clear evening sky. The county completed its final winter lantern certification that morning. All 7 stations passed their signal tests. Each retained an amber directional lamp, though the network now carried both analog and digital traffic. At Station 4, the town installed a small plaque beside the cable house entrance. It did not list the names of officials. It did not describe the rescue in heroic language. The inscription read, "A light has meaning only when it helps someone find the way home." That evening, the first official winter watch began at Station 7. Silas arrived early and checked every circuit twice. He wore an olive shirt beneath a brown canvas jacket, dark jeans, and the same field watch. Elise's small metal lantern bridge label had been mounted beside the restored console, not inside a display case, but near the power controls where it could be touched. By 7 o'clock, the station had filled. June sat near the radio schedule with her repaired old headset. Harlan occupied the workbench and accused Cole of hiding his wire cutters. Marion arranged route maps in strict order. Owen poured coffee from the dented blue thermos he had carried for years. Tessa reviewed the watch protocol with Wade near the door. Nadine had brought apple pie. Walter complained that his slice was too small, and then gave part of it to Jonah. Lenora stood near the stove, maple leaf clip catching the light as she argued with Silas about the placement of the medical kit. Headlights appeared outside. Audrey climbed the porch steps slowly but without her brace. Bishop walked beside her in the brick-red harness, his stride strong again, though the injured shoulder remained slightly stiff in deep cold. At the top of the steps, Bishop stopped. He looked at the door. Then he raised one paw. The first tap had barely sounded when Silas opened it. Bishop remained still, apparently surprised that the complete signal had not been required. Silas stepped aside. "Station safe." Audrey smiled. "Relay secure," she answered. Bishop entered. He inspected the crowded room in the same methodical way he had on the night of the storm. He checked June, Harlan, Marion, and Owen. He paused beside Walter long enough to place a paw over the older man's boot. Finally, he lay near the radio with his head resting across Audrey's feet. At 8 o'clock, June opened the winter watch. Station 1 reported clear. Station 2 reported clear. One by one, voices traveled across the valley. Some arrived through new digital links. Others carried the warm roughness of analog radio. When Station 6 confirmed, June looked at Silas. He sat in Elise's old operator chair with the headset over one ear. For years, that chair had faced the console and the wall beyond it. Silas completed the final check. "Station 7, signal clear." He removed the headset. Behind him, conversation had resumed around the long table. Maps lay beside pie plates and repair tools. Bishop's breathing formed a quiet rhythm beneath the radio traffic. Silas turned the chair around. Then he stood and joined the others. 4 years earlier, he had believed healing would mean finding a route back to the life he had before Elise died. There was no route back. The old road ended where loss had changed it. What remained was not a return, but a choice. To open the door, answer the signal, and help build a road that had not existed before. Outside, 7 amber lights shone across Cedar Hollow. None of them erased the darkness. They simply made it possible to travel through it together. Some losses never leave us, but they do not have to close every door ahead. Silas could not return to the life he once had with Elise. He could only choose whether grief would keep him isolated or teach him to recognize the voices still calling him home. Sometimes peace begins quietly, with an answered signal, an open door, or the courage to sit beside others again. May God give comfort to anyone carrying an old sorrow, and may He place a small light along the road when the way forward feels uncertain. Share in the comments what this story meant to you, and subscribe to the channel for more stories of loyalty, healing, and the strength to begin again.